Hello and welcome everybody to the 25th Anniversary International Remote Viewing Association Conference. I've got quite a story to go through here, and I've decided the only way we can get through this thing together is if you play the role of detective along with me as we proceed. We're going to be looking at remote viewing concepts, strategies, data that might just solve a big mystery. We created a documentary video on YouTube called We Channeled Egyptian Pharaoh Akhenaten, which is out there and you can watch later on. But to understand the full significance of this project, we need to start at the very beginning. So here we go. For some reason, I found this statue of Egyptian Queen Nefertiti strangely appealing. This is a real statue. Nefertiti was the Queen of Egypt around 3,400 years ago. The statue itself was found in 1912, buried in the sand in the ancient desert city where Nefertiti and her husband Pharaoh Akhenaten lived at the time. The statue is now currently on display in Berlin. Focus in on this for a moment. Her facial features seem so aware and wise, her crown so different and appealing. For being over 3,000 years old, this statue is amazing. A masterwork. I liked it so much I even printed a small replica of it on my 3D printer. And I later watched the documentary, which gave more details, including the fact that someone wrote a book claiming the statue was a fake. And this is despite all the scientific evidence that the materials were authentic. There were photos taken around the time it was discovered, and the project supervisor had this entry in his excavation diary. How dare they call my favorite statue a fake? The whole idea bothered me. But then it occurred to me, I'm in a community of remote viewers. Why don't I turn this into a remote viewing project? Yeah, let's see what the remote viewers come up with. So, okay, how would I task these viewers? I just can't send them out for a yes or no, is it authentic or not? That's associative remote viewing, and that kind of data doesn't convince anybody. I can't persuade anybody showing them 5 ARV target matches. Look, all the viewers drew a star, and a star means it's authentic. No. I needed historical data. Data that would hopefully indicate a location and time frame, where and when it was created, maybe even how it was created, and what the surrounding area was like. A modern city or more like an ancient desert town. The problem was gathering all that data would be time-consuming. With a small team of remote viewers, I'd still need at least 4 separate remote viewing missions or more to hopefully get what I'm looking for. And long remote viewing projects extending over many months can be problematic. Alternatively, maybe I could create many different remote viewing missions, a unique one for each viewer. Hopefully their data would sort of intersect on the where, when, and how the statue was created, thus validating its authenticity or revealing it to be a fake. So that's the approach that I took here. For each remote viewer, I first considered several different alternative remote viewing missions, then considered the data I might get back from each one of those, and then chose one to actually assign to the viewer. All the remote viewing was done blind, meaning there were no hints or clues given to the viewers about what they might perceive. In each case, they were only given the mission tasking ID, like this one. This particular tasking is looking for the path of ownership of the statue, which, if you think about it, assumes absolutely nothing about its authenticity. Authentic or not, the statue would still have a path of ownership. So now let's take a look at some of the remote viewing data. First, here are photos where the statue was actually found in 1912 in the ancient town of Amarna. He's pointing to the very spot where it was buried in the sand. And here now, a remote viewer sketch. And this one captures the half-wall nature of this abandoned city pretty well. He further described it as sloping, hilly, vast, and long. A perfect match for this ancient city. And in this sketch, he seems to show something like a large suitcase with the same half walls in the background. Another viewer drew this even more like a suitcase. Amazingly, I only found out recently the bust of Nefertiti was transported out of Egypt in somebody's suitcase. The Egyptian Antiquities Committee even claimed it was smuggled out of Egypt. In any case, an amazing hit. Now here, the viewer thought he was sketching someone lying on the ground. But sometimes what you think you're sketching is more conceptual. A game your subconscious often plays with your conscious mind. Reconsider then, the statue of Nefertiti was found buried in a hole, in the ground or sand, with people standing next to half-wall city ruins watching on. Amazing. Another sketch of someone pointing to what appears to be a hole in the ground, labeling it like a graveyard for souls, an ancient encampment. Wow. These are wonderful perceptions. One of the written RV participants sent me this sketch. Remember, I was asking for information about the statue of Nefertiti. So, what's this? I had no idea. Until I saw this photo of Pharaoh Akhenaten, Nefertiti's husband. This viewer was tasked to explain how and where the statue of Nefertiti was acquired in 1912. You know, I never thought the reason it was found was because somebody had it created in the first place. A royal statue? The queen herself? That's something only her husband, the pharaoh, could have authorized. So the how and where of this tasking were both answered in one sketch. How was through Akhenaten, and where was in Akhenaten's Egypt. Now here's another sketch I puzzled over. Something circular emitting light, heat, and energy. I had no clue. Then I saw this. One of the surviving wall reliefs of Akhenaten and Nefertiti together with their god Aten, the sun. They worship the sun. Those little leaves at the end of each light ray are hands caressing everything. Wow, what a beautiful conceptualization for their god. The inner portion of Nefertiti's statue was made of gypsum, and I verified from this viewer's sketch that artisans needed an outdoor furnace to soften and work with that material. When I tasked this viewer to describe how and when the original plaster and paint were applied, I got this. Several things lined up in a row with what looks like a paintbrush being used. I find it so fascinating the remote viewers don't even know what they're sketching, yet he labeled this sketch like a rescue point for life forms. Think about that for a moment. Wow. There's a lot more supportive data. The statue was made in antiquity, in Egypt, and in the desert. But now, let's move on to the curiosities. One viewer complained he heard footsteps walking around his residence when he started his remote viewing session. It was in the evening, and curiously, the footsteps stopped when he wrote the word end on his session. I've never heard anything like this before. Another viewer wrote that some aspects of this project felt predestined. As a remote viewer, this data is unusual. Continuing on then, in this viewer's summary, he wrote, early on, I was getting impressions of what I can only describe as mystical creatures of the highest order, offering spiritual ascension, advisement, and advancement. And these were all coming through portals of waveform resonance, like a seance. I honestly had no clue what any of that meant, but let's continue. This viewer sketch was labeled like meteors out of the sky falling, and it shows the same hilly terrain in the background we saw before. Forecast insurrection, dismount tooling. Regional exodus is happening, like an escape plan. I ask myself, what did these things have to do with the statue? Up to this point, we've been concerning ourselves remote viewing Nefertiti's statue, but viewer data about an attack, insurrection, mass exodus. As project manager, I found this confusing. Okay, we're gonna play detective here. Let's examine the clues. Follow the breadcrumbs, and you'll see how these led me to consider spirit channeling as a kind of curiosity data gathering experiment. The viewers were picking up on what seemed to be an invasion, an insurrection, rioting or looting, people walking off with things, vacate the premises downtown, angry and invasive. That was in response to blind taskings like describe the statue of Nefertiti, reportedly discovered in 1912. Thinking about this, it seemed the viewers made good target contact with the statue. They described something found in a hole, in the remains of an ancient city, in a city where something like this was displayed by people intimately involved with the target statue, including Akhenaten, who was the high priest of the sun god Aten and considered a demigod by the people of Egypt. All of that data was right on. So what's with this insurrection, a mass exodus? Were these data actually occurring around the time Nefertiti's statue was created? This is what we as remote viewers often refer to as data that's nearby. So I looked up what was known about Akhenaten. After his death, there was clear evidence of animosity directed toward him, his wall reliefs chiseled out, his statues smashed, parts of his throne city, Amarna, destroyed. There was even reports the Egyptian government was trying to erase him from history. This matched more remote viewer data, like being removed from office, an epic disappointment, feelings of panic, broken promises. How sad. I also discovered this statue of Akhenaten was found buried in the sand right next to Nefertiti's. Look at the difference. What circumstances would produce this kind of result? One remote viewer wrote, "Death cult sabotage," which seemed absolutely accurate. All the hostility occurred after Akhenaten died. If you were the artisan creating this magnificent handcrafted royal statue for the queen, under what circumstances would you ever abandon it? It's so beautiful. There's like no way. Unless you were running for your life. There is no way to verify that theory. So that's when I considered using spirit channeling, in the hopes I might get, maybe an eyewitness account. I'm going to be sharing some of my channeling results in a moment, but first you should know a little bit how it works, how I acquire this data. I close my eyes in a quiet room, and I try to open a mental or telepathic conversation with the person I'm trying to contact. Receiving their thoughts is kind of mysterious. I hear choppy words and sentence fragments, with gaps of varying duration in between. By the time another word or phrase presents itself to my mind, I've probably forgotten what was said previously. This makes you feel like you're dictating babble, just words said at random. Getting answers to your questions is also not guaranteed. My channeling contacts may not remember what I'm asking them about, or they may have privacy concerns. And they are very sensitive to you, by the way, because you're sharing your mind with them. So you need to stay friendly and polite, and allow the conversation to drift according to their needs. This can be difficult, especially when you're not even sure what they said, which is why you need a transcript of your session. For that, I speak my questions and their responses into a voice recorder. I transcribe those recordings into text documents, which I study with great interest. I've been practicing this style of channeling now for over 24 years, but I've never tried to use it to gather historical data. I described what my channeling practice is like, what it involves. Now, let's review my results. If you've never seen channeling before, just keep an open mind and follow where the story is leading. So I began my channeling with Nefertiti on February 13th. But my second session was far more fruitful, and I'm displaying the full transcript of that session right now. This isn't published anywhere, so I do invite you to go back and read this, replaying this video later on. The key points here were: Nefertiti recalled the banquet where her husband, Akhenaten, proposed the statues be created. After Akhenaten's death, she remembered hostility among the highest members of the ruling class, which led to the ransacking of her throne city, Amarna. I suspect the looters were looking for anything of value, such as gold trim on statues and artistic displays. Anyway, after that a new regime was in power. Nefertiti was no longer queen. This channel data tied in with the remote viewing data beautifully, but there was one additional detail, and pay special attention here. This is where the project begins to shift from Nefertiti to Akhenaten. She recalled Akhenaten was suffering from gout at this time, and the two of them left the country for medical treatments. On that trip, Akhenaten died. He died out of Egypt, a very significant detail. All of this is not recorded in history, but so fascinating. So on a follow-up channeling, Akhenaten mentioned not only did he die, now mentioning in Syria for medical treatments, he was assassinated there. An extremely high-value detail. So I devoted my final channeling session on March 12th to get more information. My entire channeling session is reenacted word for word in our documentary video, which I suggest you watch, but I'm going to play a few brief excerpts for you right now. If you can hear me, please acknowledge.
I am Akhenaten, and I am here with Tom D. Corsell in an attempt to describe how I died. Of all, the most important was I was indeed riding a chariot on the evening of my death. I encountered a servant whom I shall not name, but he or she met their demise under the wheels of my chariot, meaning I broke her bones, driving over and killing her. That created the growing resentment among her family. A directed revenge, battering my body with sticks, as you perceived, until near death, at which point they took me to the water and dumped me, floating. You've succeeded in telling a horrific story that I can't bear to explain myself, because of my own guilt. I am fortunate to have these details exposed to the world through you. End of story.
A lot was said there, and other parts edited out due to time constraints. So let me summarize the key points. These should be clear in your mind before we ask the remote viewers to retrieve their own versions of this story. Akhenaten said, while he and Nefertiti were traveling to Syria for medical treatments, they attended a banquet. The host provided a chariot and chariot driver for their extravagant entertainment. Akhenaten, in a highly intoxicated and quarrelsome state, insisted on riding the chariot by himself. During his evening ride, he accidentally drove over someone, killing them. The victim's family members, in growing resentment, started beating him with staves, then disposed his broken body in water. Akhenaten's military escort, not having a chariot, followed well behind him on foot. They discovered his empty chariot, expanded their search, and later retrieved his body. Nefertiti concluded this session saying Akhenaten was now deceased, his jaw broken, and he looked terrible. They wrapped his body in linen strips, fitting to a corpse. This story, if true, was way more significant than my original goal, statue authentication. Was my subconscious just making all this up? I was driven wild by curiosity. Were any parts of Akhenaten's story accurate? I had to know. So I composed this remote viewing mission, wording it so no hints or clues were given about a chariot accident, family retaliation, or mentioning anything about water or a boat. The viewer will ignore all theories, written and verbal history, and report only on the actual physical events describing Egyptian Pharaoh Akhenaten's last days of physical life and related events immediately after. As usual, the viewers only got the mission ID number, and to my absolute astonishment, this is what the remote viewers sent back. Let's take the remote viewers' data point by point.
Of all, the most important was I was indeed riding a chariot on the evening of my death.
This is a 3D model of an Egyptian chariot, which might be helpful here. Let me get closer to those wheels. Those are wood wheels with metal rims. This reminded me of something I saw in Viewer 6's session. Oh my God, what an amazing match! He's even sketched a bit of the understructure there. And he's got words, closed off and wooden. Amazing, rimmed with metal and made of wood, exactly right. This isn't luck. This is exceptional remote viewing. Now let's back away a little bit. This seems to match a sketch from Viewer 5. 2 overlapping circles that he labeled as round, driven or steered, and ominous. Remember, these viewer perceptions are only coming from this 8-digit number. As amazing as it seems, the viewers have no idea what they're describing. Viewer 6 also wrote art on the wall. Here's another sketch by Viewer 6, a wheeled vehicle, which at first glance I thought was a truck. But those wheels, they're mounted outside the body on the left and right sides. He also said it had windowless entry. Interesting. Let's go back over here now. Viewer 6 sketched something looking like an axle hub, but he added the word screaming. Viewer 5 sketched a rotational motion like a tube inside another tube, like a telescope. If you've seen a telescope, the collapsing tubes can rotate within each outer one. It's so interesting how the mind interprets these perceptions. This sketch by Viewer 3 shows another correspondence. The shape is pulling me, he says, and he adds some blurry color perceptions there as well. Moving to this overhead view, this seems to symbolically match this sketch by Viewer 6. Something central and draping off the left and right sides. Oh, wow. And here's a few other verbal perceptions, all of which seem to describe a fast and potentially dangerous vehicle.
Under the circumstances, I should not have been riding without an escort. My quarrelsome state led to the events mentioned.
The remote viewers also got perceptions about the main subject. I'm pulling these data from the spreadsheets I created for all written data. Here's the perceptions the written RV people submitted. A perpetrator. Wow. Male, 5'7", with an intent to hurt someone. Strikes me as creepy. Brown skin. Had sufficient money to mislead the investigation. Case details were carefully wiped out. Very interesting. He was a driver, male, about 40, had a wife or girlfriend. I'm assuming that would be Nefertiti. He wasn't happy with his life and connected to dark people. I presume referring to dark skin again. Viewer 3, again, a male, lost in thought, sleepy or unconscious. And viewer 4 got the impression the primary subject was really stoned. Oh, wow, how apropos. Viewer 5, a male subject again, black hair, prominent lips and nose, a leader, powerful and elite, something secret or a reputation on the line. And there's something evil here, with a conflicted or mixed up heart. This viewer also picked up on the subject's emotions, like animosity, dislike and jealousy, the need to do harm, an interesting psychological profile. Viewer 6 describes a pagan tan male, and yes, Akhenaten was pagan. He worshipped the sun god Aten, having several piercings and wearing a head ornament. Yet another corroboration with Akhenaten's story as a drunk driver, even trying to blame the victim. This is powerful stuff. Viewer 7's only personality observation was this martini glass. The overall consensus from all viewers strongly agrees with Akhenaten's story. Let's move on.
I encountered a servant whom I shall not name, but he or she met their demise under the wheels of my chariot, meaning I broke her bones, driving over and killing her.
This is the data that relates most closely to some sort of accident. Viewer 6 created this series of panel illustrations like a cartoon reenactment. First, there's someone driving a vehicle by themselves. Then a worried look stepping outside their vehicle. Deep breathing, like suffocation. Skid Row. Then he shows the main subject walking back along an elevated stony bridge-like structure, bending down to look at what appears to be a human body on the ground. His reaction, oh no. He picks up the body, which from those illustrations appears to be rather small, like a child. He added these verbal impressions: screaming, state of confusion, examining under something, tire and drag marks, and of course the collision with the pedestrian which he sketched. Viewer 7 added, perhaps a catastrophic event, some kind of energy hitting. Viewer 5 writes, like a bowling ball collision. He also sketches someone holding and looking down at something. Perhaps his subconscious mind protected him from seeing it. His reaction, I can't believe that happened. Additional words, navigational contact, and may have gone into each other. This viewer also perceived the subject's sense of evading, touching it, something ominous, a mind-altering experience. These are very powerful perceptions. The overall consensus here, again, agrees with Akhenaten's story, and 2 viewers indicated that the victim was small in stature, possibly a child.
This created a growing resentment among her family. A directed revenge, battering my body with sticks, as you perceived, until near death, at which point they took me to the water and dumped me, floating.
Viewer 6 said he was a drunk driver, convicted of a crime, and tried to blame the victim. Yelling began, and he shows punches thrown. His next sketch is very close to what I myself perceived during my channeling session, but I saw several people clustered around with raised arms and staves in their hands. Viewer 4 shows rocks being used, and both provide these additional comments. Viewer 5 picked up more forceful movements and strokes, the need to do harm, an evil, historic, and true event. So what happened after that? Viewer 3 sketches a sharp, perilous drop, and that sketch dovetails into Viewer 5's sketch of a similar drop, indicating the subject seems to be descending far down. Potentially below that, viewer 6 draws a bridge, and viewer 1 also indicates a bridge, adding that it was foggy and that a body was disposed in water. Viewer 6 next shows a body below the bridge on rocks near water. Another viewer senses a drop from a height or ledge and adds there's no movement, eyes closed. Viewer 5 perceives it's motionless and may have fallen or died on the rocks. Another viewer senses something dropped higher up. There's water and there's a ghost. The consensus here is the subject was dropped from a height. A bridge was somehow involved. Water was involved, and the subject was either already dead or died from the fall.
My heart lies in the gaps of the ocean, for I was cast adrift. How was it found?
Body recovery. Viewer 5 senses the phrase, "on the hunt," and viewer 6 mentions the need for facial recognition. It's hard to believe that all this is coming from this 8-digit number. Then, most of the remote viewers sketch a boat. Viewer 6's illustration looks close to what I believe might be a royal barge, adding a sketch of the rear, labeling it a structure and the stern. Viewer 5 mentions it's in the ocean and granite shoals. He sketches something labeled looking down, which might be rippling water, then adds down in the deep, down in the grime. Another viewer writes, disturbing and broken parts. Viewer 5 senses a conflicted searching. I guess that means like a worried searching. Possibly the presence of a crocodile, which would certainly increase the risk of retrieval. He sketches bumpy prominences labeled granite-like, a rocky outcropping. Viewer 5 sketches somebody jumping into a whirlpool, a hole in the water, an ocean tunnel. A leader is involved. Not only is this data supportive to the story, but it also conveys a sense of worried concern and a surprising change of events. And there's still more.
We took his body out of the water. His face was badly marred, his mouth broken. We produced bandages along the lines of linen and wrapped his body in an effort to preserve its dignity, fitting to a corpse.
The post-mortem. Viewer 6 reported how the body was experimentally lifted. Now think about how would you lift a broken body from dangerous waters. He sketched the body on a wooden platform. Viewer 4 adds something has a wood pillow. Wow. Viewer 6 corroborates Nefertiti's perception of his broken jaw, and another viewer sketches him now looking like a mummy, matching that he was wrapped in linen, fitting to a corpse. This last part caught me by surprise. Many of the viewers actually described the entities I channeled. Several viewers perceived tunnels or space portals. Viewer 4 saw someone looking through the portal, waiting and watching. I believe that might be my spirit guide, Nirmala Sundari. He also further describes this person as not being seen, undetectable, untouchable, powerful, and interconnected. An energy coming out of a kind of door or portal. And notice it's handing me something on a plate. This viewer also senses it has a lot of intention to reach me. In his next sketch, he senses there's something interdimensional that is searching for a written prophecy.
Peace be to you for relinquishing those details upon my body, for I was foretold you would bring them forth with accuracy.
His next comments here accurately describe how I think channeling works. You move your spirit body into space-time. Then there's a nonlinear information transfer that involves waiting. That's right. I do a lot of waiting during my channeled interviews. He senses a protecting gatekeeper with an intention to reach a goal. He sees a glowing light and an interdimensional energy transfer. Amazingly, he sees 2 or more interconnected planes. These are amazing perceptions. Viewer 5 perceives a reunion of people, familiars, giving a warm greeting. Additionally, there's strategic planning going on to liberate someone or some people, most likely an opposing force. I believe that might be referring to intellects trapped by fear. This may also be a mystical experience, he says, like falling into darkness, which is what I myself perceive when I close my eyes. Darkness. It's dimensionally shifting, powerful, and elite. There's that word again. He also senses a scene of a space battle. I believe that's true, but it's not about physical space, but rather mental space. These beings are superheroes that are good and meeting here, an encampment or holy alliance. A sense of seriousness, but also positivity and a magical component. I get this sense of elevation. Wow, that's fascinating. It appears we accidentally stumbled on an embarrassing royal accident, one that was deliberately suppressed from history, possibly to save face or preserve friendly relations with the Egyptian Empire. Now, I mentioned some curiosities early on, and now we're in a better position to understand them. 3 or 4 of our most passionate remote viewers experienced some sort of ghostly or mystical experience while doing their remote viewing sessions in this project. One viewer heard footsteps walking around in his house when he began his remote viewing. These noises abruptly stopped when he wrote the word "end" upon completing that session. A second viewer drew this energy vortex in his whiteboard session, labeling it a flow of energy we don't see, but we perceive. And up at the top there, partially cut off, he wrote the word enlightenment. Another viewer felt like he was communicating with mystical beings during his viewing, spiritual advisors that were present with him. He perceived these beings as coming through a portal, generating waveform resonance. Notice this was before I even thought to use channeling in this project. Yet waveform resonation is the way I think channeling works. And these beings, he thought to some extent were guiding his work, including adding these words in his session summary. As I write this summary, I can't help but feel these beings wanted me to congratulate you, Don, as your experiment is some kind of success. I can't help but feel I'm getting praise from another dimension here. Continuing on, during the last part of this project, another remote viewer perceived beings he described as a holy alliance and involved in strategic planning. He felt there was some kind of weird activity going on, not normal, jarring, mentally, powerful, and elite. He described this as a mystical experience, like falling into darkness. These experiences go beyond the scope of this remote viewing project, so I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions here. But if you ask me as a practiced channeler, I think these viewers were experiencing a taste of spirit entities. Wow. This project started out being a remote viewing investigation of a famous Egyptian statue. Viewer data successfully identified a time frame, location, and construction methods of the statue, as I hoped. But I also got misfit data about an insurrection or something, which seemed to explain why Nefertiti's statue was abandoned. Out of curiosity, I tried to get additional information through channeling as an experiment. My channel data seemed logical and explained why the current historical accounts of Akhenaten are cloudy. His return from Syria deceased appears to have been the perfect opportunity for rival opportunists to loot his city, seize governmental control, and defame Akhenaten in every possible way. Because my channeling story was historically significant, I retasked the remote viewers to get their own versions of the story, a shift in focus, and a new dimension to this project. The remote viewing results about Akhenaten's death showed amazing correlations to my channeled account, even adding new details. They also reported a strong magical or spiritual component, indicating something like the beings I channeled. I'll say more about this in a bit. Overall, the historical data here about Nefertiti's statue and Akhenaten cannot be verified through history to my knowledge. But when our viewing and channeling data are combined with history, this fascinating picture emerges. The statues of Nefertiti and Akhenaten were created during their lifetimes and at Akhenaten's request. The middle class, impoverished by obligatory religious rituals and offerings, resulted in Akhenaten disbanding the priest class of Amun. Egypt under Akhenaten would be worshipping something real from now on, the sun. Akhenaten himself, inundated with bureaucracy, moved his throne city from Thebes to Amarna. Animosity grew toward Akhenaten, politically and from the old priest class, to the point where the royal couple fled Egypt to Syria. While there, embittered and intoxicated, Akhenaten accidentally killed someone riding a chariot. In acts of revenge, he was later murdered by the victim's family members. Nefertiti, fearing further reprisal, returned to Egypt immediately with Akhenaten's body. Knowledge of Akhenaten's death led to political squabbles in Egypt, a new regime taking power, the old priests of Amun restored, the capital city, Thebes, restored, and Akhenaten's city of Amarna looted. The statue of Nefertiti was thus abandoned during that uprising. Comparing our data, there was an unusually strong correlation between the remote viewing and channel data, hinting these two technologies can work hand in hand under the guidance of skilled operators. Remote viewing can often return accurate but scattered details, but channeling seemed to provide a clear timeline, a sequence of events in their order. A combination of both of these produced an even clearer picture than either one could provide individually. Summarizing now the curious ghostly or mystical phenomena, it seems we had, let me call it, spiritual oversight right from the start. During the statue authentication phase, remote viewers reported hearing footsteps in the house, perceptions of mystical creatures of the highest order, spiritual advisors being present, communicating through waveform resonance, sketches of other portals labeled enlightenment and spinning, and telepathic messages, including a project congratulations directed toward me. During the Akhenaten viewing stage, I think we got clarification of what we were dealing with. A holy alliance involved in strategic planning to liberate someone, which seemed like a mystical experience, and sketches of a portal with a female face protruding, waiting and watching, then emerging from it, handing us information on a plate, with a lot of intention to reach us, and having attributes of not being seen, undetectable, untouchable, powerful, and interconnected. These feelings were almost magical. In terms of strategic planning to liberate someone, I believe that was actually Akhenaten, who mentioned feeling guilty for his carelessness. Wow, what a project. Okay, in conclusion, I'd like to thank the viewers for all their amazing work, and I hope you enjoyed our efforts assembling this presentation for you today. And before I forget it, the statue of Nefertiti is not a fake. Thank you very much.